Journalist Andrew Drummond found articles that confirmed these allegations.
We dug up a lot of stuff from Scotland, lots of newspaper cuttings around the 1990s or so, where he'd been allegedly involved in defrauding the Royal Bank of Scotland. There was a major inquiry going on, and he left the country.
When Goudie moved to Australia in 1992, it was a chance to start afresh. He reinvented himself as the MBA student with a Royal Marines background. He was in a relationship with Christina for nearly 3 years, but with the apparent fraud confession, Goudie started to show his true colours.
My response was, you need to go back to Scotland and you need to answer those charges.
He would do nothing of the sort.
With Brian, any suggestion that he should own up to a lie that he's said or face the consequences, that would be met by a response in him that was indignant. He would be incensed at the idea that people would find him to have done the wrong thing and that would criticise him or punish him for that. That to him, how dare people drop onto me.
A lot of people who do these kinds of crime, particularly these kinds of serial crime, they have a great deal of trouble accepting responsibility for what they've done. Many fraudsters, for example, will blame their victims for being stupid, for falling for the con, rather than taking responsibility for actually carrying out the con themselves.
Christina later discovered that the military wound was a fiction.
I subsequently have read that wound has changed position. The wound, when he told me, was in his groin. Now the wound is in his stomach.
For Goudie, the important thing was that Scottish police couldn't touch him in Australia. The amount of money involved was not enough to enforce extradition. The case was eventually dismissed in April 1998. The year before that, Goudie moved 2,000 miles to the other side of Australia. He secured a job with multinational engineering company Fluor Daniel, which was building the remote Anaconda nickel-cobalt mine. Goudie seemed to have a solid CV and was taken on as finance manager. Sergeant Glenn Lammonby came to know Goudie through a later sequence of events.
Mr. Goudie was a finance manager, was my understanding. He was responsible for paying accounts. He was also a signatory to the account. He obviously had a hands-on role in terms of paying accounts for the company.
What the company didn't know was that he'd never completed his MBA in Townsville and has no known finance qualifications from the University of Edinburgh or anywhere else. The Scottish allegations continued to haunt him. Because of them, Australian immigration rejected his application for permanent residency. But Goudie launched an appeal, asking a colleague at Fluor Daniel to be a character witness.
So at the tribunal hearing, his current employer gave evidence for him and they supported him. They said they couldn't believe that he would be involved in any fraud. He was nothing but professional. So they really vouched for him. Interestingly, within a month, 2 months, 3 months of that hearing, he took them down for an extraordinary amount of money.
Goudie was responsible for paying all the company's suppliers. But one day, the management received a complaint.
One of their suppliers had contacted Fluor Daniel in relation to an invoice that hadn't been paid. Fluor Daniel went back through their records. The paper records show that the cheque was issued against the invoice. A photocopy of that cheque was attached to the paperwork and the relevant invoice.
But the supplier, Vinidex, was adamant they hadn't received payment, so the mining company checked again.
It appears that the actual photocopy is altered in some way. However, Fleur Daniel did a trace on the actual cheque that was issued, and that cheque was chased to an account of Brian Goudie.
Further investigations revealed that from August to October, Brian Goudie had written 3 fraudulent checks, totaling over $330,000.
One of the cheques we traced to an account to an individual in South Australia. It was through that we actually identified that that cheque was used to purchase a vessel. It was like a large cruiser, cabin cruiser type vessel. The gentleman in South Australia was able to tell us that he did deal with a person by the name of Brian Goudie.
The others were tampered with to make Goudie the payee. All evidence pointed directly to him. Fleur Daniel sacked him and applied to have his assets seized.
We made some inquiries in terms of trying to locate Mr Goudie in Perth, which were unsuccessful.
Goudie had already left town. He moved to southern Australia and started using a false name.
Ultimately, an extradition warrant was issued, and then with the assistance of New South Wales police that were able to locate him.
He was arrested in mid-1998, and at his trial, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. While in jail, his hearing came up against the Immigration Department. Goudie represented himself because he was denied legal aid.
We will not uphold your appeal.
Though he failed in his appeal, he seems to have got a taste for advocating in court.
What we know about most criminals is that they tend to desist in crime as they get older. That is, the number and the frequency of the crimes they commit gets less as they age. With the serial fraudsters, they don't desist. It can be a small success at one point, says, hey, I can do this, I can get away with this, and so I'll try something bigger.
Goudie lay low throughout the early 2000s, living in Hong Kong for a few years, before heading to Thailand. He moved first to Bangkok, and then to the beach resort of Pattaya.
Well, this is the Pattaya Provincial Court. Most of his cases are here, although I think he's had some in Bangkok and some in the Gulf of Thailand, and also I think maybe 1 or 2 down in Koh Samui. He's really done his homework. I mean, he has studied not only just Thai, but legal Thai. He can convince he's convinced lots of foreigners here that he's the real thing.
Another of Goudie's clients was an expat from Northern Ireland.
Was a guy called Jimmy Halliday, who was an Ulsterman, a notorious drugs trafficker in Ulster.
Halliday had left Northern Ireland 9 years earlier to live in Pattaya. He bought a drinking establishment and got his girlfriend, Lek, to run the bar.
I stayed with him for 8-9 years. Stay together. We have business together. I run the bar.
In 2012, Halliday was arrested over an assault and put in jail.
While on remand, he contracted a very serious flesh-eating disease called necrotizing fasciitis. Goudie heard about the case. He stepped in and said, don't worry, I can get this guy into hospital.
The disease spread, and Halliday lost the use of his legs. Acting as his so-called lawyer, Goudie succeeded in getting Halliday out of prison and into a hospital for treatment. But Goudie then barred Lek from seeing him.
I never see him because Brian not give me near him. Only last time.
When he finally let her see Jimmy, the dying man asked her to stay and care for him.
He cried and he want I look after him at the hospital. He speak, make sure I tell Brian, tell everyone I want to stay look after him. But no, he not let me. I very sad for him. He's a big man, he's strong. I cannot believe what happened with him.
Lek had always understood that she would get the bar in the event of Jimmy's death. But during his final days in hospital, something different happened.
While in hospital, Jimmy Halliday signed over his power of attorney. Essentially, Goudie used that power of attorney to take the Jaggy Thistle and to take an apartment and anything belonging to the company called Jimmy, which was owned by Jimmy Halliday. So Jimmy Halliday died and everything went to Goudie. There are many people, I suppose, should have had Halliday's estate. I mean, he has 2 children, which he had actually written a will in favour of some years ago. But more recently, he'd written a letter in favour of his girlfriend called Lek, and with whom he'd stayed for 9 years.
Brian, he take everything. When he have paper from he die, he go to court, he can take care everything for business. Take everything, everything. Have car, have motorbike, have condo, have the bar 2 units. Take everything. I not get nothing. I cannot believe how he can do. How he can do.
Lek does not have the money to go through a lengthy court case with Goudie. But 3 different parties are now pursuing him in the Thai courts. A property manager alleges Goudie took nearly $200,000 from him in so-called legal fees. Goudie has been charged with impersonating a lawyer and had to post bail of $3,000.
I see your passport.
Passport button.
His former assistant has filed a case with the Thai police, alleging that Goudie posted private nude photos of her on the internet after a dispute. And Mr. Yongyat is still working on the case for Barbara Miller. They have succeeded in getting Goudie's assets frozen while it comes to court.
We charge him 2 allegations. One is false cheating, and second is embezzlement money. I think it's sad, very sad, because he's an old woman.
Up till now, Goudie has relied on the complex Thai legal system and his own talent for lies to stay a free man.
It's quite clear that he's very smart to a certain degree. Under any close scrutiny, no, he's not. He's left himself wide open in many areas.
He is never going to front up and let someone prosecute him or investigate him. Not easily. He's not going to let that happen because that represents a threat to his reality.
For now, he remains at large in Thailand, but it's clear that his victims and the police are closing in.